Winter can be a little bleak, but a great way to bring more life to your backyard this winter is by attracting birds. And there's three awesome ways we can do that I'm going to talk to you about from inside. Whew, okay. So there's one thing that birds need in winter that most people completely overlook. And it's actually something that will make your entire garden look much more beautiful, especially in the wintertime. If we hang a feeder in a garden that looks like this, then birds are basically going to shoot in, grab food, and then fly right back out to someplace where they can eat it safely. But we can do one thing that will actually keep them hanging around in our yards longer, and that's providing them layers of cover that they can hide in and hang out. So we're going to build a layered garden that has a few really important features, and the first one is evergreen shrubs. These are one of the best ways to keep birds actually in your yard where you're trying to enjoy them, because they can sort of grab food from your feeder and then they'll just dart underneath the bushes where they can kind of hide out and eat. And especially in the winter time when most of the trees and most of the shrubs have dropped their leaves, there's really nothing to protect birds from things like hawks. So we've had hawks actually just sitting right on the branches right above our feeders. We've had foxes stalking underneath. One year, one actually caught a squirrel and just sat in our backyard eating it, which was a little bit uncomfortable to watch. People's cats are also massive predators, especially near bird feeders. And so including evergreens is a great way to get birds hanging around and staying in your garden. It also helps to keep them warm and gives them shelter when it's like really windy, snowy, times when the weather is really rough. These evergreens are going to be really important cover for them. The next thing we're going to want to include is at least one tree. If you have a really large yard that already has things like canopy trees, that's an amazing start. Canopy trees are really important to let birds get up off the ground where a lot of the predators might be able to easily target them. You can also, if you have a smaller yard or an existing canopy tree, there's a huge number of understory trees that we can work into our space. And these trees can actually be a food source as well. So things like river birch have seeds that cling on through the winter that birds will happily eat. There's trees like hawthorn that make winter fruits that will hang on, and birds are hugely attracted to those. So we can actually choose these trees to be a really beautiful focal point of our garden and a bird feeder on their own. So they're going to hang out not only at your feeder, but they're going to treat your whole garden like a bird feeder. Another thing we can think about is trees that have textured bark. Something like interesting bark on a tree can be a really beautiful feature in a garden. And what's really fun is that a lot of birds will stash food, sort of like the way squirrels will take food and then go around burying it. Birds will do this too. I've seen where sunflower seeds have been stashed in the bark of one of our silver maple trees. It's got sort of a textured bark where you can nestle in a seed and hide it there. And a lot of birds will do this. So basically they will treat our garden like a food pantry where they can hide out their snacks and come back later. Another element we want to include in a winter garden are native berry producing shrubs. These will be extremely showy in the wintertime because they're going to have bright fruits that are meant to attract birds. There's quite a few really beautiful shrubs that will hold onto their fruit through the winter. A few that I've started to include in my garden are winterberry hollies, which you can get in more compact forms if you don't have a huge amount of space, or you can get some that will get quite large. Another one is our native cranberry viburnum. That's a sort of an understory shrub that will get fairly large, but it has fruits that will hang on through the winter and even into the spring. And you can use them in recipes like you would sort of traditional cranberries. So you can also kind of harvest these fruits for yourself. Beautyberry is another one that's really stunning, have really bright purple fruits. Another thing about including berries naturally in your garden is that when you go to purchase bird food, a lot of the times the price for seeds with berries mixed in is a lot higher. So if you can provide a lot of those berries through your plants, you're going to save a lot of money on bird food. For all of these different shrubs, you're going to want to be careful to find the species that's native to your region. So a lot of the time, plant nurseries will carry Asian varieties or European varieties of these shrubs. And a lot of the times, these can become invasive in our local woodlands and things like that. So the best way to provide for our birds is to plant our locally native species, because what studies have found is that the fruit of those species is actually tailored to the birds that are local as well. So the berries and the birds are actually meant to go together. And this is another great way to attract birds, because a lot of our wild spaces are starting to get completely overcrowded with invasive species. A lot of the plants that they used to use, that they would plan to use in the wintertime as a food source, are much less readily available for them. So our gardens will become extra attractive if we can start to fold these into our own spaces. Okay, the next layer we want to include is native perennials that have seeds that will hold on through the winter time. And we don't want to cut these back. For all of these different plants that we're talking about, we want to kind of leave these up through the winter time because they're going to both provide shelter and a food source. A lot of the time, what I'll see in my own yard is that the birds will come to the feeder first, but then when they eat a little bit of seed and kind of get their fill, they'll move into other parts of my garden where I have left up perennials with seeds on top, and they'll hang out in those gardens and basically just sit there eating the seeds off of my plants, which is really fun. And then we want to think about ground covers. One great option would be something like sedges that might hold onto seeds through the winter time, provide cover, a windbreak for any ground feeding birds, which you'll see a lot of birds won't necessarily perch at your feeders, but they'll sort of eat the seed that's falling underneath. So if they have a place underneath that's well sheltered for them, that can help to keep them warm and also provide them cover from those predators. And if we can make those ground covers a food source as well, triple whammy. Is that a triple? We can also think about ground covers that bear fruits. Things like cranberry, bearberry are both great options that would, I think, be evergreen. To double check that, I think those would be evergreens throughout their native range. And then another form of ground cover can come through things like leaf litter. There's a lot of great reasons to leave the leaves in your garden beds, and birds are no exception. We have a lot of ground feeding birds that will just sit around kicking in the leaves. They are able to find sometimes insects underneath of those leaves. So the leaf litter gives them sort of almost, it reminds me of like an enrichment activity for if you have pets. Sometimes you have to find ways to give them activities that mimic their natural instincts. And so the leaf litter, I think, is really fun to keep down because you can see the birds kind of exercising their instincts to hunt for bugs underneath of your feeders and things like that. Another great option are little piles of twigs, or if you can squeeze in some logs. I have a lot of fun watching the birds using our logs. There will be insects that will be hiding underneath of the logs. We get woodpeckers that will just sit along and peck the logs. It also helps to get them just a little bit off the ground, which is a more comfortable space for a lot of birds. A lot of them feel more vulnerable on the ground than they would perched even just a foot or two off of the ground. So those logs give another layer for them to protect themselves from predators that might be creeping around under your feeder. So once we have our layered garden in place, or at least planned, the next big thing we can do is to hang a feeder. I've been talking about feeders throughout so far, but unfortunately, most of us are wasting a lot of money when we are buying seed for wild birds. Most of the affordable looking wild bird seed, so like sort of discount wild bird seed, typically includes over 70% filler, which is nutritionally unhelpful for birds. It's not going to help them survive the winter. It sometimes is not even meant for wild birds. Sometimes it's like parakeet food that they'll include. But birdseed can be quite expensive. So I'm going to talk about where I have started to buy my own birdseed. So which bird foods will actually help your birds to survive in the winter and won't be just wasting your money? Well, the first thing we're going to do is look at the ingredients, and we're going to avoid any seed mixes that contain any of the following: milo, wheat, millet, flax, or canary grass seed, which is meant for pet birds. All of these are cheap, low nutrition fillers, and your birds are going to completely ignore it. It's going to just drop onto the ground, attract pests, can attract invasive bird species. It also is going to promote mold growth in your seed. So if you've ever opened your bird feeder and seen like webby white gunk growing in there, or in the bag, or wherever you store it, that is most likely due to your fillers. When I used to buy bird seed when I was a young woman, which probably had filler, I saw a lot of this kind of mold growth, and then all of my seed was wasted. Whereas now when I buy only seed that avoids any of those fillers, I haven't seen mold in years. And studies that have looked at the price of those discount seed blends that have those fillers compared to prices that don't have the fillers, once you remove the filler and sort of recalibrate the prices, they cost the same thing. So you're really just wasting money on those discount brands. So we're going to look for foods that only contain things like sunflower seeds, peanuts, berries, and then suet is an incredibly important option for birds in the wintertime. When it's cold like it is today, down in the 20s here in Maryland, birds are basically out there with just their little bit of feathers. And in order to survive, they basically have to be fat, little juicy things. So we want to give them lots of protein and fat sources. And a quality bird seed, another thing that you can look for in a quality bird seed is that it's going to actually give a nutritional breakdown of things like the fat and protein content. And then they also include fiber. There's a fourth one. I'll throw up a picture. I have started buying my birdseed from chewy.com. They're not sponsoring this video. And the nice thing about going to the Chewy website is that you can look at the different bird foods and you can get the ingredient breakdown, as well as for all of the quality foods, you can see that nutritional chart that shows the fiber, protein, fat balance. You also have to be really careful because some of the bird seeds will package themselves with something that says something like waste free. I saw one brand that was doing this. It was the biggest words on the bag were waste free, and it was mostly filler. 3 of the 5 ingredients were filler. And what they were really trying to say was everything in the bag was shelled. So that's not waste free, because if 3 out of the 5 ingredients are ones that wild birds won't eat, that's certainly a waste of money. But they were using that language to actually describe something that was shell free, shelled seeds. So you have to be really careful and actually look at those ingredients and make sure that you don't see any fillers in there whatsoever. Okay, so let's do a little side-by-side quiz. Which of these 2 foods will be better to buy for our birds and for our wallets? It's going to be this one on the left. Here we see only those ingredients that are really fatty and high in protein. Sunflower seeds, again, peanuts, and berries. And we don't see any fillers in this one. So this is going to be more expensive looking, but once we calibrate for the price of those fillers, it's actually going to cost us the same. An interesting thing that you might notice when you hang a feeder is that you will have times when there's absolutely no one at the feeder, and then suddenly there'll be sort of an onslaught of birds of all different kinds of species. And this is a really fun phenomenon called mixed species flocking. And this kind of highlights the importance of that first category we were talking about of building up a layered garden. In mixed species flocking, what we actually see is that birds will work together to form a group that can come into a space and feed. And by basically cooperating within that group of different species, they are better able to protect themselves, to come into new territories, and to sort of feed more efficiently. Because the mixed species flocking, one of the important things it provides for birds is a stronger defense. So the way that the birds will combine, they each bring different strengths and weaknesses. So for example, you might see some nearsighted birds in combination with some farsighted birds. You will often see at least one species that has really flashy colors, which can serve as a deterrent from predators. There was an interesting combination, I think, that was seen commonly, which was that downy, let's see, I have it written down here. Downy woodpeckers would frequently use chickadees and titmice as sentinels. So you would often see combinations of those species together because they can kind of work together to stay safer while they're eating. I'll link an article that talks about all the different benefits that cause birds to do this mixed species flocking, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. One thing that can actually be harder for birds to find in winter than food, and that's fresh liquid water. Especially if you live further north where the water is mostly frozen as ice and snow throughout the winter, then birds, they can eat the snow, but it's going to drop their body temperature, which can be really dangerous for them. They have to eat fats to stay warm, and anything that's going to bring their body temperature down is going to put them at higher risk of death. So one of the really important things we can do in the wintertime is to provide clean, liquid source of water. If you are up north where the water freezes, then you can consider getting a heated bird bath. We just got one this year, and the birds have been coming to the feeders and then immediately to the water, and they fly off to different parts of the garden. A lot of these heated bird baths just have a short plug on them, so you're going to need to get an extension cord that's meant for outdoor use, as well as they make these nice little cover things that can go around where the extension cord plugs into the bird bath. And that would basically keep it watertight, and that just keeps the electrical cord safe outside when it's exposed to the weather. You can also get heaters. So if you already have a bird bath that you use in the summertime, You can just get heaters that you can add to the bird bath. But again, you're going to have sort of a short cord for everything that I saw available. So you're still going to probably need an outdoor extension cord with that. I'll see if I can find the thing I'm talking about, little clamshell looking thing. I first had our heated bird bath kind of close to the house where I could easily go out to fill it. You're going to want to fill it daily or every other day. Really keep an eye on it because the water will both get used by the birds, but also evaporate or spill over the edges. But you'll also start to see that they'll drop seeds and shells in there by accident. They'll go to the bathroom in there. So you really want to make sure that you're keeping that water fresh. This is true in the winter and in the summertime. Keep that water fresh and then also clean it every 1 to 2 weeks. In the winter, I think you can go a little bit closer to 2 weeks between cleanings. And that you can just use a little bit of vinegar and water mixed up to clean it out. Our kids have toys kind of scattered across our garden, and there's a little toy shovel next to the bird bath that I've seen the birds really enjoy using. A lot of the birds actually seem to prefer going to that little shovel to get a drink than the heated bath. It's sheltered between a table that we have out there and the bird bath, so that kind of highlights again the importance of having shelter for the birds so that they'll actually hang around. A lot of them, instead of coming up to the flashy orange heated bath, they'll go to that little shovel underneath. So I've actually been making sure that I keep the shovel full of fresh water as well. There's a YouTube channel that I will link that shows a photographer who I think lives up, I can't remember if he's up in Canada, but he builds basically dedicated spaces for birds to try to photograph them. So he's a photographer, wildlife photographer. And so he builds spaces that have lots of shelter, water sources, and food sources, and then just waits for the birds to come in. So that's a fun sort of reference. He does a very extravagant job, and you don't need to have, as quite of an elaborate setup as he does, but it's kind of fun to see him pull all of these different pieces into action in his own space to bring in lots of different species of wild birds. So the big number one thing we talked about before we hang feeders and provide water sources is getting that safety net of a layered garden for our birds. But that's one of the hardest things to do, especially if you're working with a space that doesn't have any mature gardens. Starting from scratch can be incredibly difficult. My hope for this channel is to combine garden design and habitat design concepts in a way that lets people start to build gardens in their own spaces that are beautiful, but also attract in lots of life, including bees, butterflies, birds. So if you're interested in learning more about how to design gardens that attract a ton of life, watch this video next.